Hello, I'm Dan Ware. My guest today on my portion of Franklin Franklin is someone who has been on the program before. I'm going to be talking today with Dr. L F Beasley, a retired physician who practiced medicine in Franklin for over 40 years. And the first time he came on, he was a young man. He was only 90 years old then. He's now a little past 94. And so we thought it was time for him to come back and enlighten and entertain us one more time. Doctor, welcome. How's your health? Is your health still holding up pretty good?
Well, somebody asked me that the other day. And I said, well, I can't see and I can't hear and I can't smell and can't taste and very little feeling and can't walk and got a broken back and I can't talk. So you want me to go on with the rest of it?
No, but
they told me not to go ahead with the rest of it.
But other than that, you're doing all right.
No, I got a lot of other things.
Longer list. All right.
But we won't go into those.
Oh, we'll change the topic then. Last I knew, you were still driving a car yourself and driving downtown to drink coffee. Is that true?
Yeah, I still do.
Oh, well, that's good.
But I quit mowing my yard.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. You know, that's all right. I had to quit mowing my yard too.
Well, I wanted to say to you before we started that I'm awful happy to see you on the program again. You had a pretty long and tough layoff, I know.
Yeah, I was off for a little over a year, but I got that behind me now.
Yeah,
so
I'm real proud.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. For those of you that did not catch the program Dr. Beasley was on before, I revealed then that he was the doctor who delivered me when I was born 50 or so years ago. Other than the fact that you delivered me, did you make any other mistakes while you were practicing medicine, or was that it?
Well, I haven't been caught in any of them that I know of.
Well, good. We were talking about the fact that you still drive, but when you were born 94 years ago, I don't guess there were many cars around then, were there?
I can remember when the first two automobiles were bought in the place where I grew up. I think it was about 1913. I was about 4 or 5 years old. I had never seen an automobile before that time.
What did you think? Do you remember, or were you kind
No,
of...
I don't remember that. I remember I was glad to see it.
Yeah. Well, before you left home to go to school, did your family, your parents, did they ever own a car before you left home?
Well, my father bought one of those first two cars. My father was a doctor.
Uh-huh.
And he and one other man, they bought those two cars. And what I remember most about those early automobiles was somehow once or twice in my early life, we went to Nashville in our car. And we took at least four spare tires and 5 or 6 inner tubes because you never got down there and back without having 3 or 4 flat tires.
Yeah. How far was your home from Nashville?
About 60 miles.
So to go 60 miles, you better have 4 spare tires.
Well, I'd say 4. It might have been 5 or 3 or 6, but it was a bunch.
Yeah.
We had more tires than we did people most of the time.
Yeah. So if you were 5 when he bought the car, I guess you probably still remember the horse and buggy days too, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, I had to ride one of those horses up on a hillside down there to get the cows every night.
Oh, really? That was your job?
Well, part of the time I had to walk.
Yeah. Did you have a big family? Do you have a lot of brothers and sisters?
I had 1 brother and 1 sister.
I see. And everybody had their chores, I guess, that they had to do.
Well, I did anyway. I was the middle one.
Uh-huh.
You know, they were proud of the first one
and spoiled the last one?
The last one, when she got spoiled a little bit more.
Well, now I know you had 5 daughters, so did you follow that pattern? Did you spoil the one in the middle?
Well, I guess, you know, you're talking about automobiles and horses and buggies. We didn't have birth control pills in those days either.
All right. Well,
I'm proud of my 6 children.
5 daughters and 1 son, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, see, you stayed at it long enough till you got a son to go in there with all those daughters.
About that time, surgeons came in.
Okay. Well, do you see your children pretty much these days? Are they relatively close? Or?
Two of them live here, Barbara and Beth Ann, who are with me today.
Yes.
And one's in Owensboro, and one's in Mayfield. One's in Jacksonville, Florida, and one's in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one in Dallas, I see probably a little less than any of the others. But yes, I see them frequently.
Well, that's good. I'm sure that you enjoy those reunions. Now, your son is a doctor, too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he lives in Mayfield.
So your father was a doctor.
Yes.
You were a doctor.
Yeah.
Your son's a doctor.
Right.
Does your son have any children? Are you encouraging your grandchildren to become doctors?
He has two girls and one boy.
Okay. Is there a doctor in the group?
Well, the boy's 80, he's 12 years old now, so I don't think he's given much thought to his career up to this point.
Well, I guess time will tell on that.
I hope so, yeah.
But I think you told me the first time I talked to you, when you went off to school, you didn't actually start out thinking that you were going to be a doctor, did you?
That's right. I was just sort of glad to get to go to school to do anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I started off. In those days, we called it in the College of Commerce.
That's like business?
At the University of Tennessee.
Okay.
And on the way back to school the third year, of course, the way I got to school, I rode the train from Carthage Junction to Knoxville to get to school. And on the way up there, I decided I believe I'd study medicine. I got there and sent my father a telegram that I wanted to change courses if it was all right with him. Now, we did have a telephone exchange in Pleasant Shade at that time.
Oh, you did? Already?
Okay. You never knew you would get through it or not, so I relied on Western Union to help me.
I see. So you sent him a telegram saying I'm...
Yeah.
Yeah? Was he pleased with your decision?
He said, go ahead and do it. He was rather non-committal both before and after that time. I think he was pleased.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure he'd seen it from both sides. You know, I asked you the first time you were on if you made house calls, and you said yeah, and you said your doctor had to because when he was practicing, there wasn't any cars, and if you were too sick, so sick you needed a doctor, you couldn't ride a horse to the doctor, so the doctor had to come to you.
Yes.
But was that, once you started practicing medicine, for how long did you make house calls before you stopped doing that?
Well, I would say I continued to make a few calls until I stopped. However, primarily after the war, I didn't make nearly as many calls. See, I spent 4 years in the war.
Right.
I don't look much like a soldier, but I was with them all that time. Anyway.
Where were you stationed during the war?
Well, it started out at Camp Forest, and we went half a dozen places in this country before we went overseas. And I went in on Omaha Beach and across France and Germany and Belgium, Battle of the Bulge.
But I assume you were there as a medic, right? Since you had medical training, and so I guess you had to treat a lot of people on what was a pretty bloody battle.
Well, believe it or not, I spent most of my time, I said, call it riding poop. I was in, for a large part of that time, I was in division headquarters, and we actually didn't shoot any guns. And in fact, I told somebody the other day, and I don't know that I'm proud of this fact, but it was just the way it turned out that I spent 18 months in warfare, including the Battle of the Bulge, and I haven't heard a gun shoot yet.
Well, some people would say that you were very lucky in that regard.
I'm lucky to be here now, I think.
Yeah, that's probably true. But now you had already come to Franklin, and you had a practice here before you went into the service.
Right.
Yeah. But now you didn't have, to my knowledge, any relatives in Franklin, Kentucky. You were brought up in Tennessee.
That's right.
So we're all very glad you picked us, but I'm curious what it was that brought you here. Did you come in because there weren't enough doctors in Franklin at that time, or?
Well, no, I don't think there's ever been a time there were not enough doctors anywhere.
Oh, okay.
I mean, as far as I know, there's doctors around all the time. But it just turns out that I thought I saw an opportunity here and moved in.
And other than that time in the war, you were practicing for 40 some odd years, right?
Right. That included 4 years in the war.
Yeah. Well, I guess in that amount of time, you saw a lot of changes in medicine and in treatments.
A lot of them have happened since I got out of circulation, and I really haven't seen as much of them as the doctors who are working today are seeing.
Well, I know it's an ongoing process, but I'm sure over that amount of time there were strides, and you were probably able to do more for people in 1970 than you did in 1935.
Well...
yes and no?
Yes. I mean, changes take place, improvements are happening all the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you first started practicing in Franklin, and that would have been sometime in what, early 30s?
34.
34. What was our hospital like then? And nowadays, a lot of people feel like they can go to Bowling Green or Nashville for medical care if they need a specialist. Did that happen much then?
There was not a hospital in Franklin when I came here.
No hospital at all? Okay.
Well, the building was there, but it was not being operated.
I see. Okay. But then someone opened it as a privately owned hospital.
That's right.
And because it had to have been, because I was born in it. And then they built the hospital we have now, I think in the 60s, if I'm remembering correctly. Well, I'm going to get you to retell a story that you told me the other time. We were talking about you were practicing here in 1937, and you had a patient in Middleton that had pneumonia, and you had to go see him, but you couldn't go the direct route because the water was high. And I believe you said you held a record for the longest trip to go see to make a house call in Simpson County because of the roundabout way you took. Do you remember that story?
I remember the story, I remember the time, I remember the man. I can't say that that was a record. I just said that I thought it might have been a record.
Well, from the way you described it, it sounded like a long way to go a short distance.
Well, actually, I went to, I believe I went to Springfield, and then took the road from Springfield to Russellville, and then came back toward Franklin from Russellville on this particular trip. And
yeah, and there was something about Dick Byram taking you in a boat or something.
Dick Byram, of course, was a young man then, as I was. He was not quite as young as me. He said there is a low place around Middleton, if you don't know about it, where when it rains a lot, the water gets over the road. And he took me across that lake in a boat to see the patient whose name was Boyd Hammond, and of course Boyd's not living anymore. Now, what happened at that time, I had gone from Franklin to Sulphur Spring and could go there, but that particular day, the Spring Creek was up past fording. I couldn't cross it, so I thought it was absolutely necessary to go. Fortunately, the good Lord took care of Mr. Hammond. He got well.
Well, that's good. But you were very dedicated to, sounds like you were determined to get to him one way or another.
Well, I thought he needed help. Of course, we did not have antibiotics at that time, you know. It wasn't too easy to treat them. Nowadays, most pneumonias, you give them a couple of pills and they get up and go to work the next day. Or maybe that's an exaggeration, but close to it. But half of them died in those days.
Yeah. Well, if when you started, the hospital wasn't working here, I don't guess you had too many days off, did you? I mean, you probably had to work weekends a lot.
Well, I exaggerate a little bit when I talk, but I told several people that I worked 27 hours a day for 40 years. No time off.
Well, you retired, gosh, it's been, what, 25 years ago?
27 years ago.
Yeah? You wish
1975.
Do you wish you'd stayed in it any longer, or were you ready to quit?
Well, I could have gone back if I had wanted to. I thought had worked long enough.
Mm-hmm.
It was becoming more difficult for me to catch on to all the new things that were happening. And I always tried to think tried to do a good job for people when I saw them, and I think that you have to quit somewhere.
Yeah. Well, you kind of broke in some new doctors in your clinic and brought some new physicians to town over the years, didn't
Yes,
you?
I did. First one I had was Dr. Vinsel.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, actually, he was here before we became partners, but we agreed to merge, hoping we could get a day off now and then if one of us was gone.
Right.
And, of course, he stayed 3 or 4 years, and then he went to the hospital and took a residency in pediatrics, moved to Missouri. And I haven't seen him since.
Okay.
I hear that he has retired.
Has he? Okay.
And he's older there.
Mm-hmm.
This second one I had was Dr. Albee, who is still here.
Yeah.
But he got caught up in the military too. He had to go to, well, I guess it was the Korean War. It might have been the Vietnam War. I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe Vietnam. Yeah.
And after him, I had Dr. Vermillion, and he got squirreled away by a radiologist we had who came from Clarksville, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked him into going to Clarksville. The last one I had was Dr. Pulliam, and before he could leave, I left.
I see.
So
Right.
I left it up with him.
He's still here and still practicing. Well, I remember your office as being at the corner of College Street and Madison Street.
I moved into that office. I had bought a house and remodeled it, or tried to, on December 5th, 1941.
Okay.
2 days later was Pearl Harbor.
So you had this house, but you didn't get to use it.
I didn't go into the Army till about May or June. I forgot exactly when.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm remembering correctly, that building you were in when I used to come to you kind of had tall ceilings in there. And I remember the waiting room and the little window where you registered, and you were on one side and the other doctor on the other.
Right.
And that to me, that's what a doctor's office was supposed to look like, because that's the first doctor's office that I really remember.
Well, they basically still look about the same way, except that nowadays they have to have 5 people back in behind that window writing the records out and mailing them into the insurance companies. So they tell me.
Yeah, I think that part, Doctor, has changed a lot since your days, and you probably just collected a check from them and that was it, right?
Some of them.
Some of you might never collect it from.
Well, I never did, and I don't think any of the other doctors in Franklin did at that time. Refused to see somebody because they might not pay us.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had a lot of so-called accounts that I charged off that I didn't expect to get money for when I treated them.
Right.
That doesn't happen today.
Well,
they tell me.
That's probably a shame, though.
Of course, you have insurance companies that take care of a lot of them.
Right, right. Well, now, for a man who worked 27 hours a day for 40 years in the medical field, you somehow managed to find some time for some business interests. You were involved in banking, you were involved in farming, you were involved in civic affairs. So you must have had a 36-hour day that you were working with if you had time for these other pursuits.
I'd say that the other pursuits perhaps suffered more than my practice did. I hope it did. I hope they did anyway.
Yeah, but now I know that you were involved for years with the Simpson County Bank, and I'm sure you took a keen interest in the economy of our little town. How, as you drive around today in your car and look around the square and the town, does it seem pretty much like the same place, or do you feel like sometimes I don't hardly recognize it to what it used to be?
Well, at one time I could very almost always speak to somebody I met on the street. I knew nearly everybody in Simpson County. And I also knew where they all lived because I had made calls all over the county. Today, I don't know anybody who lives here. See, all the people that I knew when I came to Franklin, and I can't say this without exception, but they're not here anymore. They're gone.
Well,
See, that's, I'm now 94 years old, and there are no 94-year-olds around the square.
well, it's a shame that you've outlived them, but that's better than the alternative.
Well, sorry for them, but I'm proud to be here.
Yeah. Now, I have heard it said that over the years, you were a pretty good stock picker, that you've done pretty well in the stock market. And I wondered if you could share a little wisdom with the rest of us. Is that true? Are you pretty good at recognizing
I don't
stocks?
know, but 6 months ago, I was talking with one of my children about the depression that we are in.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the statement to her that when General Electric gets down to 25, you might begin to consider buying some stocks again. Today it's 27 something, so it's come down from 50 to 27. So I don't know how accurate that's going to be, but it's
All
something
right.
to look forward to.
Well, there you go, folks. You heard it here first. Is it true that Warren Buffett calls you up for advice?
I'm afraid not.
No?
I am an admirer of Warren Buffett, although
Yeah.
I have no reason to be except what I read about him.
How long have you been in the stock market? Do you recall when you first got in?
I can't tell you that for sure. I'll tell you this. Back in, of course, I didn't buy any stocks for several years. I was trying to buy groceries all that
No,
time.
I imagine, yeah. Those 6 kids had to eat, didn't they?
The first stock I bought was, I thought the automobile industry was going to do well, and of course it has.
Mm-hmm.
But there must have been 15 automobile manufacturers in the United States.
Right.
The first stock I bought was Packard Motors. Now I don't remember.
I remember Packard.
I don't remember the dates on it, but I bought 25 shares. It cost me about $2,500 or something like that.
Okay.
And 10 or 15 years later, Packard wasn't doing too well, and they merged with Studebaker.
Okay.
So they gave me a reverse split on my 25 shares. I had to send that in. They sent me 5 shares. I got 1 for 5.
Okay.
Well, somehow Studebaker didn't do well either. And pretty soon they had another reverse split. And I got 1 for 5. So I had 1 share. And I sold that 1 share for $20. So
So the automobile sector has not been your strong suit.
I have had some fortunate things happen to me, I guess, but you also can have some unfortunate things happen to you too.
Well, the first car you bought, was it a Packard, or what was your first car?
I never owned a Packard.
What kind of car did you drive?
Ford.
Ford.
At
You
that time. I've had several different kinds since then. Incidentally, the last 5 cars I bought, I knew that was going to be the last car I would buy. Now I've had this one for 6 years, but I'm not driving much, so I think I'm going to try to hang on with this one.
So you think the 6th last car you bought may really be?
It may be.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily take any bets on that if I were you.
If I live long enough, I'll hire a chauffeur and get me another one.
Well, there you go.
It may
There
take
you
a
go.
while.
Well, we were talking about your location on the corner there of College and Madison, and right behind you there, Dr. Kelly had his dentist office.
Yes.
And I think you told me a story that I'd like to get you to tell again about your first plane ride. And I believe you told me that you and Dr. Kelly went out to see the Rose Bowl.
We sure did.
And you went on a plane, and you actually slept in a berth on the plane.
1940.
Yeah?
41. I used to remember most things, but I don't anymore. But Tennessee played Southern Cal in the Rose Bowl that year. And Dr. Kelly and I, well, we were friends from the time I came here because he was already here. So we decided to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we bought plane tickets and got on a plane in Nashville. I don't remember the time, but 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And the next morning, we arrived in L.A. it was after daylight, I think. I don't remember the hours.
So it took all night.
But anyway, it took all night. But anyway, we stopped in Nashville, Memphis, Little Rock, Dallas, Phoenix, and seemed like El Paso.
Yeah.
And this plane was a prop plane.
Right. Didn't have jets back
And
then.
it had berths on it, just like Pullman cars used to have.
Yeah.
Of course, if anybody's listening to this, they may not know what a Pullman car is and what a berth is, but it had berths. We slept in those berths, except I don't think either one of us slept much, but we went to bed on a bit away.
Yeah, probably might have been too excited to sleep. Yeah. So that was your first plane trip,
That
right?
was my first plane trip.
Yeah. What did you think 30 years later when they had spaceships going to the moon?
I didn't want to go.
Didn't want to go? No. Okay. You still feel that way?
Pardon?
You still feel that way? I think they're selling seats now. You might could.
No,
walk up, no?
I don't walk well enough to want to go now.
But you have, over your lifetime, there certainly has been a lot of technological change.
Yes, it has. Now, of course, I'm sure that has happened all the times before that, too, but it's amazing what all has happened. Every time we get something new, we wonder what can happen next. I never thought we'd have TV.
Yeah.
Of course, I'd have to think computers outdid them all, so I don't know what's coming next.
Well, when you were on here before, you just bought a computer. You'd only had it about 3 weeks. And at that point, the only thing you could do, you told me, was play solitaire. Have you progressed since then?
Frankly, very little.
Very little.
I can do a few things on there. Of course, most members of my family are somewhat adept at handling a computer, and they help me out with it a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful thing. You just can't believe it would happen.
Well, I think it's to your credit that at 90 years you were ready to give it a go. You know, I think some people would have said, nah, that's not for me.
I
But
wanted to see about it.
I guess did you always try to keep up with whatever was new? Did you buy a television set fairly early on?
I don't remember when we bought one. It wasn't too long after they came out, but I don't remember when we bought one.
Yeah. We had Irene Harding Cornett on here a couple of weeks ago, and she said that she and her husband had one of the first ones in town, and they put it on their front porch so other people could stand out in the yard and watch it. And apparently that was a big deal at that time for people to get to see that.
You know, things have happened pretty fast all along. Now, I built my house in 1952.
Uh-huh.
We couldn't get air conditioning. About the time we got completed, John Taylor Butts came by my house and said that they had completed, perfected air conditioning for homes and wanted me to put it in my house. Well, I had built, my house was built on contract, and whoever had the contract for the heat didn't want to do with it, so we didn't put it in. But I have had window units all these years. Now I have I guess you call it a heat pump, heat and air conditioning both.
Now, is this the same house that you're in now?
Yeah.
How did you pick that location? You're right next to a school. Did you want to be close to the school, or?
In 1948, we got married, and next was a few months after that, Carson Helm, who was a Ford dealer at that time, was retired, and he and his wife wanted to move to Florida and spend the rest of their lives. And they rented us the house that they lived in, which is down on South Main Street. Within 6 months, they notified me that they were coming back from Florida. I had to look for another place. Well, at that particular time, Mrs. Drone, whose son still lives here, she and her husband bought a farm out on Middleton Road and built a new house. And she knew I was looking for a house, So she rented me her house for the rest of my life because they were going to live on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, about 4 months later, they didn't like the farm life at all. For some reason, they wanted to come back to town. So I started looking for a house.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, there was not a house I could rent or buy.
Really?
Or a lot I could buy to build on it.
Yeah.
In the city limits of Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I wanted to get the conveniences of electricity and gas and all that.
Right, right.
And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And Mr. Crocker, Lon Crocker, lived in the house where I now live. Well, he lived on the lot which I now where I live.
Right.
Died. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, but Emmett was his lawyer. Emmett lived next door to me until he died.
Right.
And I tried to call Emmett. I thought maybe the house would be for sale.
Mm-hmm.
He was in Florida. He went to Florida every winter.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I don't remember the dates, but I called his brother Lawrence, had it, asked him if he knew when Emmett was coming home. I'd found out that he would be the lawyer involved in handling Mr. Crocker's estate. So he came in a week or two, called me when he got in, and I told him what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I asked him if they were going to sell it at auction or privately. And he said, well, we're going to sell it privately. I said, how much, you know how much it'll take to get it? He said, well, we're going to have sealed bids for it. So I submitted a bid and got the house.
I see.
Well, it's a nice house, and Beth Ann lives in it now. We moved it on. I thought I ought to remodel it a little bit. It was a fairly old house at that time. So I talked to Sparky Biles. He said, if you do a whole lot better off to burn it or tear it down or give it away or do something.
Yeah.
So I located some people from Goodlettsville who could move houses. There may be lots of them who do that now. I guess they are. But anyway, they moved that house to the back of the lot. It's a fairly large lot.
Okay.
And built the house. Now, Beth Ann remodeled that house, so she lives in it now.
Yeah, yeah. And then you built in front of it after you got that one moved.
I moved it right up.
Yeah.
My present house is where it was sitting when I bought it.
Yeah. Well, on a Friday night when they have a football game, does it ever bother you to be sitting so close to
I try to be there.
You try to be at the game?
At the game.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't matter that you
No,
because you're not home anyway.
Didn't bother me.
Well, when you got ready to retire, did you think about maybe moving to Florida or Arizona or somewhere?
No.
Never considered doing that?
I thought this was my home.
Well, good. Uh-huh.
And I'm proud I stayed here. No, I have been to Florida. I have been to Arizona. But 2 weeks is a long time in Florida.
Okay. You have any kinfolks left down in Tennessee?
Not of my generation. I have 2 nieces who live down there. One lives in Carthage, and the other one lives in Hendersonville.
I see. Yeah.
And they, of course, are beginning to get some age on them too.
Mm-hmm. What's there might have been a lot of Beasleys down where you were from, but there's not so many Beasleys up here. What's your ancestry? What kind of Beasley is? What name is that?
I have a book that a cousin of mine, whom I do not know, but I know her family, wrote, called Beasley Blood.
Beasley Blood, okay.
And it's a book, I guess, 200 pages.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's been amazing the things I've read about that. There isn't anybody in Smith County, Tennessee, who is not kin to me.
Oh really?
That's exaggerated a little bit.
But not too far off the mark.
I've kidded everybody down there.
Yeah.
My father was one of 10. My mother was one of 9. And most Beasley generations before that time had from 8 to 15 children. One at least had 15.
My goodness.
And back about But you know, I can't count big figures anymore. About 70 years ago, we erected a monument or placard over in, I forget the name of the bend of the Cumberland River, across the river from where I live.
I see.
So my great some sort of grandfather who served in the Revolutionary War.
Oh, really? Okay.
And a very interesting thing about that, we read a placard, and it said that he served 2 weeks in the rear ranks as a private in Captain John Brown, that's a fictitious name, John Brown's company.
Mm.
And so for about 8 or 10 years, I got letters from the Sons of the American Revolution every week.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, now, when you were on here the first time, I asked you what LF stood for in Dr. L F Beasley.
Yeah, I told you, too.
Yeah, you didn't much want to,
well,
but you did.
I didn't think my mother was wise. My father's name was John, and the Beasleys had all kinds of names, that Tom, Henry, Bill, and so forth.
Right.
And I don't know why she and our next door neighbor came up on the name they did, but I got it, and nobody in Franklin, I bet not a dozen people in Franklin can tell you what my first name is.
Well, I think I remember, but I won't tell it unless you want me to.
Well, I tell people. I mean, I don't keep it a secret.
It's something Lillard Phocion or something like
Lillard
that.
Phocion.
I say I was pretty close, yeah. Well, that's a unique name. Definitely a unique name.
They had a reunion at Pleasant Shade School. Now, that was the village where I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I grew up, it was a fairly active place because it had nothing but horses and buggies. Mm-hmm. There were 5 or 6 creeks came together right there and formed a creek.
Right. And
all the roads followed the creek. They didn't go down the creek bed, but right beside the creek. There was hilly, very near, almost mountainous down there where I lived.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And so there were 7 or 8 stores there, a big sawmill, and had 2 barber shops and 3 doctors and 2 drug stores. We thought we were really growing.
Yeah, a nice, thriving little community. Yeah. Well,
go ahead. Anyway, there's nothing there now but one little Minute Mart type store, except much smaller than the Minute Mart. So only store there. However, they still have a post office. They still have a telephone exchange.
Oh, do they? Pleasant Shade. Sounds like that ought to be a place they'd put on TV, you know? Yeah. Well, the time that you were on here before, you told me that when you were going to school there, somehow you managed to jump 4 grades in 1 year.
No, I didn't jump. That's
well, you got promoted.
That's just the way
But you started out the year in the 4th grade, and by the end of the year, you told me you was in the 8th grade.
Well, I'll tell you that story again. I started to tell you they had a meeting down there a dinner meeting at the school in November, and I went, and Beth Ann went with me, and Susan. And now I left there in 19 and 21.
Okay.
And this was 2001, so that's 80 years.
Right.
So anyway, I wanted to go, and I did go, and I saw a few relatives of mine and people that at least knew who I was.
After all that time, they still knew who you were. That's great.
I told that story to them because it was a school meeting, and I think they're trying to keep the school board from closing the Pleasant Shade School.
I see.
So I told them that in the early days, in my early days, that Pleasant Shade did not have community schools. We didn't have school boards. Mm-hmm. The only way you could go to school was different parents would donate a certain amount of money, whatever they wanted, they could, and they'd hire a teacher. And he'd teach for 2 or 3 months, and the money gave out. The teacher gave out. We didn't have a teacher.
Yeah.
Well, in that neighborhood, my father was a doctor and made house calls, so he knew There was Kittrell School up one road, and Sanderson's up another road, Macy's Hill up one, and Piper's another, and Pleasant Shade. And I went to all of those schools.
They didn't all run out of money at the same time.
He wanted, well, they didn't run at the same time.
I see.
But he wanted us to have education if we could.
Right.
And so I went to all of those schools over a period of 12 or 15 months. In the fourth grade, I had practically memorized the first 30 of those fourth grade books.
I would imagine, yeah. Because every time he'd start you again, yeah. I see.
But anyway, we never did get through the books. And so in 1920, I don't know, of course, I was 12 years old, so I don't remember, didn't know too much about it. But we started a public school system. We had a 7-month school board, school term. And all of these last four schools I'd been to had different teachers. And we had a new teacher for the Pleasant Shade School at that time. And we went to school and registered in. I told him I was going to be in the 5th grade. Now, I'd been in the 4th grade all these other schools.
Yeah, and had that book memorized.
And so a cousin of mine moved back to Pleasant Shade from somewhere, and he said he was going to be in the 6th grade.
Yeah.
Well, after 2 or 3 days, he was one teacher school, 8th grade, and about 75, 80 students in that school, I guess. I don't remember the numbers. So after about 3 or 4 days, he just told me to go on and get in 6th grade with this other boy. And we had classes separate. He had our two, and in the meantime, he had already combined the 7th and 8th grade. So after about 2 weeks, he just said he couldn't handle 8th grades. So he just moved us into the 8th grade. So I finished 4 years of school, Woody. And I got through, so I guess it was all right.
I guess so. And there's not too many that could say that they did that.
Well, I don't guess anybody had that opportunity.
Must have worked all right, though, because you went on to college and worked out all right. Was it expensive to go to college back in those days?
Not like it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Did you have a job? Did you have to work for your room and board?
I did not work when I was in school.
You were able to concentrate on your studies.
My daddy was able to pay my bills.
Yeah. Now this would have been, I guess, a little bit after World War I when you were in college.
That was 1920, and so I graduated from the 8th grade in 21.
Right.
High school 25.
Okay.
And I went to college.
What was it like being a young man in the 20s? You know, we hear about people doing the Charleston and the Jazz Age and the Roaring 20s. Did it seem like good times to you? Or?
Yeah, I never thought anything about it being anything else, except that I think I'm making a true statement when I tell you that I personally did not indulge in dating. I don't think I ever had a date until I got in college. I don't remember ever having a date in high school.
Oh,
I know
really?
I never had a girlfriend.
Okay.
That's still staying with me. Still don't have one, you know.
Well, now that was before you went on TV. That might change now that all these people in the audience.
Well, that's been 4 years.
Didn't work the first time? All right. Well, we keep
I think that was right after my wife died. And of course, I'm kidding about that, but
yeah.
I'm not interested in that anyway.
Right.
Been here too long.
Well, Henry Stone, you know Henry, was at the Franklin Favorite WFKN for years, and he's doing some interviews like what I'm doing with you. Yeah. Well, he told me that he really misses, he said that when he was in Rotary, at the first of the year, every year, you would come into the Rotary Club and you would give economic forecast for the coming year.
Yeah, I did.
And he says he really misses that.
Well, what actually happened, there were a few of us before we had a golf course here who went to Bowling Green to play golf. We played, well, either at the municipal course or some of us played at the country club. And of course you have to ride up there and you have to ride back.
Right.
So we engaged in a certain amount of conversation, and I guess I guess we solved all the problems of the world about that. One year they had a fellow from Merrill Lynch down in Nashville, I forget his name, who came up and gave us a talk at the Rotary Club on the economic situation.
Mm-hmm.
And Howard Sugar, who owned the drugstore where
Right.
you used to
Yeah.
hold for,
Right.
he said, you know, I'd rather have Beasley to give that than him. I don't know why, but somehow they asked me to do it the next
Yeah,
year, and
yeah.
I did it for 20 or 25 years.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't know that anybody got rich down there.
Well, if you decide you want to do that again, we'll make you a little time available. You can come on and.
You include me out of that.
All right. Well, now you've already told us to watch for if General Electric gets below $25, right?
Well, I didn't say. I told them not to get into it till he got below there.
That's when to buy. All right. All right. Yeah, I want to get it right. So okay. Well, let's see. I had you on at 90. Had you on at 94. So are you making appointments for 98 yet?
Well, I tell you, I thought you were going to ask me how I had fared in the 4 years since we talked before. And
Well, you're looking pretty good, but if you want to elaborate,
I
you
made
go
up
ahead.
my mind to tell you that in those 4 years I've aged 40 years. So I doubt I'll live 6 more years.
Well, I'm just holding out for 4, so we'll take it one at a time.
Take it one at a time.
All right. Well, it's good to see you again. Good to talk with you. I do hope you're able to come back at some point, and I hope you have many more years left.
Thank you very much.
There's some people that'll be 120. I don't know why you couldn't be one of them. Somebody's going
Well,
to.
I told you all the things. I mean, some of the things I've got wrong.
Well, yeah, I know.
If you'd have
but-
given me about 5 more minutes, I could have told you about 10 or 15 more.
Yeah, but a lot of people that don't have all those things wrong with them are in the ground right now.
Well,
so, just because you got a few things wrong
I
with
think
them.
most of them had a lot of things wrong with them that the doctors never did diagnose.
Well, now that might be. But I'm glad you're still out and about and able to drive, and obviously you're still sharp. So I hope you certainly enjoy whatever time you do have left.
I'm going to work at it.
Well, that's good. That's good. And you have a standing invitation to come back and be with us, okay?
Okay. Thank you a lot.
Sure. I've been talking with Dr. L F Beasley, a retired physician who practiced in Franklin for 40 years and continued to live here throughout his long and active retirement. And I've certainly enjoyed having him. I hope you've enjoyed this program. Please stay tuned. We'll be back next week with a new set of guests and a new Frankly Franklin.